Hello and welcome to Katrina's Creations. And oh, my neck looks so thin here. I like this. Yeah. Anyway, totally off topic. Anyway, we are here for day number 10 of our yarn advent calendar. So let's get into this, and then I will fill you in on another vintage video to watch. At this point, I'm giving up on the scissors and remembering it. It's more fun and satisfying just to rip through paper. I think if I used the scissors, I'd be afraid I was going to cut the yarn anyway. Ooh, pretty. Here we go. Let me show it to you. All different shades of blue, and it is called Winter Nights, and that fits it. There's actually some little speckles in here too. See if I can get it to focus on them. There, you can see some of the speckling that's in it as well. So it's really pretty. So that is today's yarn. Now I am going to insert a video, just like I did with the history of crochet. I'm going to stick a video in that was made about the same time, about 5 years ago, and it is on the history of knitting. So again, you will see the fatter me with long, fluffy gray hair. So anyway, with that, I'll let you guys watch the video.
Now, the oldest existing knitting that they have an example of dates to the 11th century in Egypt. It was a sock, and it had short row shaping. So the fact that there's something that intricate going on with the short rows on the heel, and your first project's not normally a sock. So it just demonstrates that there was obviously some knitting going on prior to that, but that's just the oldest actual example of knitting that is out there. The early Europeans in the 13th century were doing knitting, but they were having it done by the Muslims that lived in the area that were working for the royal families. Examples have been found in their tombs, in the royal family's tombs, and some of these examples also are present in Estonia. They were intricate color work, and the artwork of the day actually depicts people knitting. There's actually a Madonna and child, and in the picture, Mary is knitting. The oldest knitting needles are not the straight knitting needles that you would expect. The oldest knitting needles were actually double-pointed needles, and knitting in the round was done before flat knitting. Circular needles were invented right around the turn of the 1900s, but the very first knitting needles were double-pointed needles. The first pearl and yarn over stitches appear in Europe around the mid-16th century. Knitting schools were established to provide incomes for like cottage industry for some of the poor families. They would do knitting for the rich people who at that time were wearing clothing that had a lot of lace around the collar, or they had lace around the sleeves. And so that was all knitted or crocheted. So I talked about that a little bit last week with the crocheters doing cottage industries of making the crochet to sell. Knitters were doing the exact same thing. The cable stitch was developed in Ireland in the 1800s, and knitting was an important occupation in Scotland in the 16 and 1700s, where whole families knitted once again to help the income of the family. Fair Isle was also invented in Scotland. Fair Isle is a form of color work with very distinct patterns involved. Sweaters were worn by fishermen to protect them from the cold waters off of the Scottish coast, and a lot of times drowning victims were identified by the very specific patterns that were on the sweaters that, of course, were knitted by their family members. So it was an identification system as well. The first knitting machine was invented in 1589, and it was in England. However, Queen Elizabeth I was afraid of it becoming popular, that it would take work away from the people who were doing it as a cottage industry. And she also didn't like the way the stockings fit. It was a stocking knitting machine. And she didn't feel that it gave her the same fit as somebody who was hand knitting it for her. So the man that invented it took it over to France, and it's funny, he took it to the city of Rouen, which I talked about in the holiday along a couple weeks ago, where one of the teams had stopped for the week, was in the city of Rouen. It's also the city where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. And so this man took his knitting machine over to France. He opened the first factory in Rouen and began knitting socks there and stockings. Nottingham in the UK became known for a lace machine knitting industry, as well as Leicestershire and the surrounding counties of that area for hosiery knitting. Here in the US, the first spinning mill was Slater Mill, which is in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and you can visit it. It is open to the public, and I've been there. It was a water-driven mill. And they didn't do so much the spinning, although they did have, they did the spinning there. They had knitting machines as well there. They had sock knitting machines and looms, but they were primarily known for spinning the fiber that was then used at the hosiery mills. Another place is Lowell, Massachusetts. From that whole area, from Rhode Island all the way up through Massachusetts, is part of the Blackstone River Valley. And there were a lot of hosiery and woolen mills along that river in that particular area. So Lowell, Massachusetts was known for the actual knitting. They produced the yarn as well, but they were also known for producing the fiber and the fabric. So my husband pointed out to me that in the U.S. Mint, the back of one of the quarters for 2019 has a woman weaving on a loom up in Lowell, Massachusetts. And Lowell, Massachusetts is another place that I have been to. There's quite a few woolen mills up there. And you can actually visit that as part of the National Park Service here in the U.S. This is, right here, is the 2019, this is part of a proof set, but this is 2019 quarter, and the woman is spinning at a wheel up in Lowell, Massachusetts. North Carolina today is known for its hosiery mills. In fact, my husband's relatives, some of them worked at the hosiery mills, which produced socks and stockings and things like that. Knitting has been used for the troops in all of our wars. Martha Washington actually encouraged knitting for the socks for the troops, as did Eleanor Roosevelt. She was known to take her knitting bag everywhere she went, and she actually had a nationwide campaign to get people knitting sweaters and socks and hats for the troops. So you could go to the stores and you could purchase yarn and a pattern and knit for the troops, but you had to do it in the specific colors that were officially recognized by the military. Harriet Tubman, there's a famous picture of her she was known for this shawl that she would wear, and there is a very famous picture, and if you look at it, she's wearing a white shawl, and if you look at her hand, she's holding a knitting needle, set of knitting needles, and a ball of yarn. Fair Isle and Argyle sweaters became popular in the 1920s because the Prince of Wales at that time, who later became king and then abdicated, he was golfing and he wore Fair Isle and Argyle sweaters. So it became the popular thing. Coco Chanel also embraced the knitting in fashion and in her designs, and Vogue magazine started featuring patterns. Vogue knitting is still around. In fact, they put on programs. They have a big one in New York. I think it's coming up actually. But Vogue knitting was born out of that interest in knitting. And Lucy Coolidge, who was one of the first ladies, one of the president's wives, she was an avid knitter. In fact, she entered a baby layette in a competition through Vogue Knitting, and she won. She did it anonymously because she was the first lady and she didn't want people to think she won just because of who she was. She actually won honorable mention, and she is known for having stockings, silk stockings that she had knitted that actually had her monogram in them. So she must have been quite the knitter. She was also known for crochet too. As I've mentioned before, she crocheted a bedspread that is in the Lincoln bed. It covers the Lincoln bed in the Lincoln bedroom. And it was her hope that each of the first ladies, as they succeeded into office with their husbands, that they would contribute some kind of a handicraft to the White House to be part of its history. So I don't know if any of the other ones followed up on it, but I know she did. So now as for what am I wearing, because I am wearing some knitwear today. This is the Basic Stitches cowl. Let's see if I can get it close enough for you to see there. This is a free pattern. I have a tutorial series. If you want to learn to knit and you would like to have a project to show for it that you can wear afterwards, it's called the Basic Stitches Cowl. And if you click the little eye up here, that will take you over to the playlist. Each lesson takes you through a different step of the cowl and teaches you different techniques. So you will learn garter and stockinette, and there's some yarn overs here, and seed stitch and cabling. So if you would like to learn to knit and want to have a tutorial how to do it and have something to show for it afterwards, you can do that. All you need is one skein of yarn. This is a one skein wonder. One skein of worsted weight yarn. It could be any fiber you would like it to be, and you would be all set to go. So I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up.
So that's it for today. If you haven't already, don't forget, I'll put the link right here for Christmas in July fairies. I will also put the video at the end of this video, the link to it, so you can click right over. If you haven't already gotten entered, you got a few more days to do that. So I'll let you get entered so that you get a chance at winning all the prizes. So that's it today. Thanks again for watching. Bye, everybody.